Moving on to question 3, I mean, we're looking at the appropriate balance of uses along our high street, which is something that we've already touched on. I mean, there's obviously quite a number of designated shopping areas within Westminster, and what we're really asking is, looking at the existing UDP section, is the balance already right, or should we be more flexible in allowing complementary uses in some or all of our shopping centres? And should we prioritise particular types of non-A1 use classes and restrict others? And I think perhaps, I mean, there can be general comments on this, but there probably are some quite specific examples, because our shopping areas do perform differently against their town centre health checks. And so if there's a particular shopping area that you wanted to discuss, please just raise that in particular.
Can you just give some examples, perhaps, of these complementary uses?
Sure. The complementary uses, we're really referring to perhaps cultural uses, perhaps art uses. More generally, we'd expect cafe uses to be classed as complementary. So really, for people going on their shopping trip, the additional uses they'd expect to find, as well as the A1 shops.
Just a couple of quick thoughts on that. There's also increasing the medical uses, walk-in facilities. I think we need to look beyond the A class for some uses that in the future will be seen as complementary to the shopping function. Just mention that. The other thing, just on your question on timescale, you'll recall the draft UDP had 3 years vacancy, which we brought down to 18 months in discussions. I still think 18 months for an empty shop is quite damaging for a street. I think if we go down temporary uses, that would help in the short term.
Okay. That's it on here.
Yes, in context of what was just said about widening the scope beyond Class A, in many respects, of course, a lot of otherwise acceptable shopping area uses are excluded from your centres. Are you giving some thought to widening the scope of some of the acceptable uses, say, in your primary frontages? And if not, why not?
So would you be able to give an example?
Banks, restaurants, virtually every use within Part A that doesn't fall within Class A1.
Sure. Through our policy, we would try and achieve an appropriate mix for the centre. So if that did, for example, if there was only A1 shops, we could allow a bank to come into the centre as well.
That's not my understanding of how the policy operates on Oxford Street. That's what I'm talking about.
Frontages, that there's an abundance of retail, and that it sort of all feeds off each other, and that's what makes it so successful and so unique. And there isn't the vacancy, a lot of vacant units on the primary shopping frontages that operate successfully. So I don't think we feel that there's a need to change that policy and introduce non-A1 uses.
Is that driven by a perception of what retailers want? I mean, just from a layman's perspective, shoe shops often want to be close together or whatever. Is that what people feel, that particularly landowners and developers, that's what retailers are telling them, or is there more room, more scope, as you're intimating, for more complementary use? I suppose that's the question. Are we getting it right?
Many other centres in the UK do quite readily accept, say, Class A2 traders within their primary frontages, and there's no evidence of harm. But for some reason, Westminster has always, over the last 30-odd years, opposed them.
Perhaps we could just clarify the difference between primary frontages, core frontages and secondary frontages, because I just want to make sure that everyone is using the same terminology.
Just go back to this map. The primary shopping frontages are Oxford Street, Regent Street, Bond Street, and we're literally referring to the active shop frontage along the main road. We've also got differentiation between, within the major and the district shopping centres, we have core frontages, where there's the main concentration of A1 retail activity, and secondary frontages, where you may find things like the bank uses, possibly health uses, as you mentioned, other supporting activities that aren't necessarily within the A-class use.
So if we look back at Appendix 1, which is in the briefing notes here, so that this differentiates between the core frontages and the secondary frontages, where there's quite different percentages for the amount of non-A1 retail for each of the different town centres. Okay, Keith,
Yes. I think without discussing the detail of Appendix 1, I think it's a good starting point, and I think clearly one needs a different approach to different centres, and the recognition that centres play a different role and in terms of the overall shopping hierarchy. Personally, I think my view is that a firm policy on A1 uses on the primary frontages of the West End special retail policy area is the correct one. There is scope for complementary uses in and around the West End, and we've seen a good example over the last year or so with the relocation of the Photographers Gallery to Ramley Street, which I think is a major benefit to the West End, but wouldn't be appropriate on Oxford Street itself.
Thank you. The gentleman at the front.
Just on the primary frontage question, amongst a whole host of others, I think you need to be incredibly careful if you start allowing non-A1 uses into your primary frontage. Choosing my words carefully, but if you look at Kensington High Street, which has been going through quite a difficult period, they have just let a big unit to Barclays Bank. There is another unit under offer to another bank. And the sense we're getting from retailers is that's very much a negative thing rather than a positive thing. And banks are very useful and you need them, retailers need them, but you just have to be very careful about where they are and how they break up retail frontages. So to answer your earlier question, shoe retailers particularly like to sit next to other shoe retailers. There's an element of comparison shop. Fashion retailers the same. I've never asked retailers directly, but the sense is they tend to think that non-retail uses get in the way a bit. If you look at the three main streets and how they now operate, there's been a net loss of restaurants on those streets, particularly fast food restaurants over a period of time, and they are all the food offers are either moving back into the department stores or the larger stores or into the oases, which have worked incredibly well. And I think you'll see more of that happening over a period of time, I suspect.
Thank you. Did anyone want to comment on any of the smaller centres?